Redditor 1. Sometimes the night sky reveals secrets that defy all logic, and one such night still boggles my mind to this day. My husband and I live in an apartment complex in a busy urban area, surrounded by towering tech headquarters and snaking highways. It's a place where the mundane rhythm of city life rarely gives way to the inexplicable. Yet on one late Saturday night, everything changed. It was around 1 a.m. when we arrived back at our building after a long evening in the parking garage. The air was cool and crisp, and the city's neon glow mingled with the soft murmur of distant traffic. We were walking side by side down the deserted walkway, our conversation light and tired, when I happened to glance upward. There, cutting through the inky darkness like an impossible anomaly, was a huge, triangular object, slowly gliding above us. My breath caught. I stopped mid-stride, and my husband, noticing the change in my expression, followed my gaze. The object was massive. Its sharp, geometric shape contrasted starkly against the irregular canvas of the night sky. It had 2 rows of lights along each side that blinked with an almost hypnotic regularity, yet there was not a hint of sound, no rumble or whir of engines, just silence. We exchanged bewildered looks, our voices immediately rising in an excited, incredulous argument about what the duck this thing could be. Without a word, we turned and began to walk around the side of the building, heading to a spot where we might get a clearer view. The urban landscape, usually so predictable with its bright street lamps and bustling sidewalks, now felt like a stage for something otherworldly. I remember the chill that ran down my spine as I kept glancing back at that dark expanse of sky, feeling as though the stars themselves had shifted into unfamiliar patterns. About 10 minutes later, we reached a vantage point near the building's edge. There, almost as if summoned by our determination, the triangular craft reappeared. This time closer and far clearer. I could see minor details on its body. The structure was smooth and metallic, and the rows of lights pulsed in a deliberate, almost rhythmic pattern. My husband's hand gripped mine tightly as we both stood there, nearly screaming in unison. "What the actual duck is that?" Our voices echoed softly in the still night, mingling with the distant sounds of the city. We watched, transfixed, as the craft began to move again. It pulled straight up into the air, its motion slow and deliberate, as if defying gravity by some unseen force. I felt a strange mixture of awe and dread. The object ascended slowly, its shape remaining perfectly triangular. Then gradually, it seemed to become transparent, as if it were dissolving into the night. One moment it was there in all its bizarre majesty, and the next it vanished without a trace, leaving nothing but an empty sky. For what felt like an eternity, though in reality it was probably only about an hour, we kept looking upward, our eyes straining against the dark. We even managed to capture a few blurry shots on my cell phone, though from the top of the tallest apartment building across the street, our camera could only hint at the strange object's presence. Every time I checked, the sky remained empty, the mysterious craft gone as if it had never been there at all. We eventually trudged back inside, our minds swirling with questions. How could such an enormous object, reminiscent of a stealth bomber in its shape, appear over our bustling, highly populated neighborhood? Here, amid the constant hum of urban life, it was as if the cosmos had decided to reveal a secret normally reserved for the rural and the remote. It wasn't like those typical rural sightings, no isolated fields, no endless horizons, just the familiar chaos of the city, yet under the rule of an event that defied every expectation. Later, after we had calmed down enough to sit together and discuss what we had seen, we scoured online forums and did a little research. Many compared our experience to sightings of stealth bomber aircraft, yet nothing about the craft we witnessed matched any known technology. Its complete silence, the way it could simply vanish into thin air, and its uncanny, otherworldly design all pointed to something beyond human engineering. I still find myself checking the skies at night, especially on clear evenings when the city lights dim to a soft glow. There's a part of me that holds onto the memory with equal parts terror and fascination, as if the universe had handed me a glimpse of its hidden wonders and its mysteries. Every time I look up, I wonder if that same triangular shape might reappear, silently floating above our world to remind me that we are not alone, that there is so much more to existence than our daily routines. Even now, when my husband and I walk home late at night or sit by our window sipping coffee in the early hours, I catch myself glancing upward, half expecting to see a flash of those 2 rows of lights cutting through the dark. And even though time has passed, that night remains etched into my mind. A moment when the ordinary clashed with the extraordinary, and for a few precious minutes, the universe whispered secrets too vast to comprehend. I don't know what it was. A visitor from another world, a top-secret military project gone awry, or simply a trick of light and urban reflections. But I do know that it was real as the pounding of my heart that night. And though I may never find the answers I seek, the memory of that silent, glowing triangle continues to haunt me. A constant reminder that even in the midst of our busy, well-lit lives, the cosmos holds secrets, waiting quietly in the dark to be discovered. Hey everyone, if you found this channel gripping and want more real stories, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you're always in the loop. Redditor 2. I was 10 years old, living in a tiny mountain town in central Oregon. We were so poor that we didn't even have a proper bedroom. Instead, my younger sisters and I slept on a single futon in the cramped living room of our double-wide trailer. That night, everything changed. It was early, long past midnight, and I must have been drifting in and out of sleep on that worn-out futon. The air was cool and still, and the only light came from a flickering lamp in the corner. Suddenly, I was jolted awake, not by the usual creaks of our old house or the distant sounds of the mountains, but by an overwhelming brightness flooding the room. At first, I thought a semi had overturned, its headlights glaring through the thin curtains. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized that the light was impossibly pure, a searing white that washed over every surface. I tried to move, to sit up and see what was causing the intrusion, but my body refused to obey. It felt like I was caught in a state of sleep paralysis, where every muscle was locked in place. Panic surged through me as I struggled to cry out for help, but no sound escaped my lips. My sisters remained sound asleep beside me, their soft breathing a stark contrast to the terror gripping my heart. Then, as if something out of a fevered dream, a figure appeared in the periphery of my vision. I saw through the blinding light a being that resembled the gray aliens people spoke of. Its head enormous and its eyes deep, black voids that seemed to absorb the light. The creature moved with an eerie, deliberate grace, and before I could fully comprehend what was happening, it drifted effortlessly through the living room wall as if it were made of smoke. I was helpless, unable to move or even scream as it floated closer to me. I recall a surreal sensation as the alien extended a limb toward me. It was as if the creature was lifting me, cradling my body with a gentle yet unyielding force. I felt no pain, only an overwhelming mixture of dread and a bizarre sense of calm that contradicted everything I knew about fear. It carried me through the wall and into a space that defied description, a passage of intense white light that seemed to lead to another realm. I was deposited onto a cold metallic surface, and for a moment, I could only register the searing brightness and the sterile chill that wrapped around me. Before I could gather my scattered thoughts, an object was placed over my face, an oxygen mask that fit so perfectly it seemed engineered for me. The mask pressed against my skin, and immediately a wave of numbness washed over me. The world dissolved into darkness, as if I'd been put under anesthesia. I lost all sense of time, minutes, hours, none of it mattered. When my vision finally began to clear, I found myself back on the futon in the living room. The blinding white light had receded, replaced by the dim glow of our meager lamp. I was still, my heart pounding slowly as the remnants of the encounter faded into the quiet murmur of the night. Across the room, in the silent darkness, I saw the alien. It hovered just outside the window, its form barely discernible, and I felt its presence like a weight on my soul. In a voice that wasn't heard but felt deep within my mind, the creature communicated. Its message was calm and deliberate. "I'm going to inject this into your neck. It won't hurt. It won't leave a mark. And it will make you think this was all just a dream." The words echoed inside me, carrying an assurance that belied the horror of what was unfolding. I was paralyzed with a mix of terror and a strange, numbing relief. As if the creature was not there to harm me, but to erase my memory of what had just occurred. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the being moved away. I remember watching it slowly drift back toward the wall, the light from its presence receding upward until it was swallowed by the darkness outside. I lay there, eyes fixed on the fading glow, feeling a profound emptiness where the encounter had taken place. It was as if a part of my reality had been gently unspooled and then rewound, leaving me with fragments of a memory that I couldn't quite piece together. Eventually, the room grew darker as I lay there, and I noticed that I hadn't fully closed my eyes. I must have been sleeping with them open, or perhaps the remnant of that strange encounter allowed me to see even in my sleep. Gradually, my vision adjusted to the dark, and I blinked, trying to reassure myself that it was all just a terrible dream. I woke up fully later, the morning light creeping in through the thin curtains. I glanced over at my sleeping sisters, who remained oblivious to the night's horrors, and then I climbed out of the futon. Still shaking, I padded barefoot to the small kitchen. My stomach churned with residual dread, yet a sudden impulse drove me to do something almost absurd. I grabbed a sweet cherry pepper from the bowl on the counter, a small, vivid reminder of childhood, and bit into it. The burst of flavor, the crisp, refreshing heat, grounded me in the real world for a brief, comforting moment. I washed it down with a glass of water, its coolness soothing the lingering unease, and then, with a heavy heart, I returned to bed. Today, years later, I sometimes wonder if that night was nothing more than an incredibly vivid dream, a trick of my sleeping mind conjured by the interplay of fear and exhaustion. I have an excellent recall for dreams, yet there remains a part of me that clings to the possibility that it was real. The alien's words, its promise to erase the memory, still echo faintly in my mind. I question whether I believe it was just a dream because that thought keeps me from looking completely crazy, or if perhaps it truly happened, as the creature had said. Each time I close my eyes, I can still see the brilliant white light, feel the cold press of the oxygen mask, and hear that calm, telepathic voice promising oblivion. The experience left me with a puzzle that I have yet to solve, a mystery that tugs at the edges of my reality. Even though it never happened again, I carry that night with me like a secret, a fragment of a world beyond our own that brushed against my life in a way that was as horrifying as it was inexplicably profound. I sometimes wonder if the shot was meant to make me forget, to dull the edges of a memory too vast for my young mind to bear. And yet, despite the relief of rationalizing it as a dream, a part of me remains forever altered. A quiet, persistent reminder that some secrets in the universe are both beautiful and terrifying. Even now, as I lie awake in the dark, I can almost sense the alien's presence in the silence, a whisper of something that exists just beyond the veil of our understanding. Redditor 3. I was about 10 years old, living in a small Midwestern town where nothing ever seemed to happen, and the park was our only refuge from the slow, stifling monotony of daily life. That day, my friends and I had gathered at our favorite spot in the park, a wide, open expanse beneath a cloudless sky, where we sat, talked, and smoked cigarettes. It was a bright, warm afternoon, the kind of day when the sun bathes everything in a golden light and the world feels safe. But in an instant, that safety dissolved into something altogether different. We had been laughing and passing the time when, without warning, the air around us shifted. I remembered the subtle change at first, a gentle deceleration in the flow of our conversation, as if time itself had begun to slow. Then, as if an unseen switch had been flipped, every sound, every movement came to an abrupt halt. I looked around and saw that my friends, who had been animated moments before, were now frozen, faces caught in expressions of shock, eyes wide and unseeing. I tried to speak, to call out to them, but no sound emerged from my throat. My entire body felt paralyzed, as if some force had gripped me and squeezed every ounce of motion from my limbs. For what felt like an eternity, I remained there, unable to blink, unable to move, a prisoner in my own body. The only thing I could do was force myself to breathe, each shallow inhalation a desperate attempt to cling to a sliver of normalcy. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, everything went dark. I remember blacking out, my consciousness swallowed by a void so complete that I later questioned if it was a dream. I woke up in a place that felt entirely alien. I was lying on a hard, cold surface in what I can only describe as a nearly pitch-black room. Around me, 3 large screens glowed with an eerie illumination. The screens displayed live images, a bird's-eye view of the park we had been in, showing our exact spot, frozen in time as if being watched from above. The images were grainy and surreal, as if I were peering into a distorted mirror of reality. I couldn't tell if I had been moved or if I had simply been taken somewhere else entirely, but the sensation was overwhelming. I had no idea how long I remained there. The concept of time seemed to stretch and collapse in that silent chamber. In that disorienting stillness, a part of me clung desperately to the memory of the park, the warm sunlight, the sound of laughter, and even the faint, comforting smell of fresh-cut grass. But all that had been stripped away, replaced by the cold glow of the screens and the oppressive darkness of the room. I felt both isolated and exposed, as if the universe had peeled back the layers of my consciousness and laid me bare before an audience of unseen watchers. The images on the screens began to shift, cycling through different angles of the park until one frame caught my attention. I could see myself, or at least my body, sitting among my friends, frozen in time as though captured by a camera at the very moment of that inexplicable stasis. My mind reeled, trying to piece together how I had gone from that park, where time had inexplicably stopped, to this cold, windowless cell of light and shadow. Then, as if a final command had been issued, I blacked out once more. When I finally came to, I found myself lying on the damp grass of the park, under a sky that had already begun its slow transition toward dusk. I was alone. My friends were scattered nearby, looking as if they too had been released from some unspoken hold. I sat up slowly, my body trembling uncontrollably, my mind filled with 1,000 unanswered questions. How had I gotten here? Had time really frozen? Or had my consciousness been taken somewhere, as if abducted by a force that defied the natural order? I was the first to speak. In a voice that wavered between awe and terror, I mumbled, "I think I met God," though not in any way that would be comforting. One of the girls, her eyes glassy with shock, simply whispered, "We're on TV somewhere," as if that brief phrase encapsulated the uncanny feeling of being observed by an unseen audience. In that moment, each of us exchanged a short, resigned statement, a silent agreement that we had all experienced something so profound, so utterly inexplicable, that words seemed inadequate. Without another word, we left the park in a daze. That day, no one dared to discuss it further. It was as if a heavy, unspoken pact bound us to silence. We returned to our lives, carrying that shared secret deep within us, a memory that would haunt the edges of our consciousness for years to come. I've often wondered if my friends felt the same way about that day, if they too perceived it as an abduction of consciousness, a moment when our very minds were snatched away and reassembled in a place beyond normal perception. I sometimes lie awake at night, the quiet hum of my thoughts mingling with a lingering fear that perhaps that experience was not just a strange anomaly, but a brush with something far greater, a glimpse into a realm where the rules of reality are rewritten. I've searched for explanations in old books and online forums, hoping to find others who had been touched by the same inexplicable force, but most dismiss it as nothing more than an overactive imagination, a product of youthful vulnerability and the hazy boundaries between sleep and wakefulness. Yet, every time I pass through that quiet park, I can almost sense it. The lingering presence of that day, the palpable feeling of being watched by eyes that belong to nothing I know. The memory is a persistent echo, a haunting reminder that the universe may hold secrets too vast for us to comprehend. And though we never spoke of it openly, I carry the weight of that experience like a scar, a silent testament to the night when time froze, and our consciousness was briefly stolen by something that remains, to this day, a mystery beyond explanation. I still wonder what it meant. Were we simply caught in a moment of collective sleep paralysis, or did our minds truly wander somewhere else, into a dimension where the extraordinary is ordinary? I may never have all the answers, and perhaps that is the most terrifying part, that the truth, if it ever exists, remains hidden in the dark, waiting to be uncovered by those brave enough to search. And so, as I gaze up at the stars on quiet, lonely nights, I can't help but feel a shiver run down my spine, wondering if somewhere out there, the secret of that day still lingers, calling us to remember what we once lost. Redditor 4. It was a late Saturday, and my boyfriend, my fiancé as he was then, had just gotten home from work. Our apartment, usually filled with the gentle hum of the city and our quiet laughter, felt unusually heavy that night. I remembered the way the corridors were draped in a dim, amber glow from the streetlights outside, the silence punctuated only by the soft tapping of my footsteps on the worn carpet. After he dropped his keys in the bowl by the door, he headed into our kitchen. I, on the other hand, drifted out of the bedroom and into the bathroom, feeling a strange, unnameable sensation prickling at the back of my mind. It was as if something was off, like the very air had shifted, thickened with an energy I couldn't explain. Standing there by the sink, I felt inexplicably frozen, my muscles locking into place for just a moment. The feeling was so profound that I had to call him over, my voice trembling as I whispered, "Can you come here for a minute?" He appeared in the doorway with a puzzled look, and as soon as our eyes met, everything changed. In that instant, it was as though the universe had pulled a fast one on us. The next thing I remember is waking up, lying side by side on our bed, flat on our backs, on top of our blankets. We were still fully dressed down to our shoes. My mind raced as I tried to piece together the fragments of what had just happened. And when I checked the clock, I was stunned to see that 3 hours had vanished without a trace. At first, we laughed it off with nervous jokes about the lost time, trying to convince ourselves it was some sort of bizarre dream. But the more we talked about it, the more unsettling the memory became. We had been together in that strange, suspended state, completely paralyzed and silent, and neither of us could recall any details of those missing hours. I remember feeling a cold dread creeping up my spine as I wondered if something had taken hold of our consciousness, a force that had lifted us from the normal flow of time. The morning after, as the soft light of dawn seeped through the curtains, we sat on our bed in silence. My fiancé's eyes were wide with disbelief, and I could see the same haunted expression in my own reflection in the mirror. Every time I try to recall that night, I catch glimpses of an almost surreal calm that had settled over us when we were frozen, like we'd been caught in the middle of a cosmic hiccup, unable to break free. I questioned whether it was a shared dream, a hallucination induced by exhaustion, or if something else entirely had happened. The more I tried to rationalize it, the less sense it made. In the days and weeks that followed, I found myself unable to shake the memory. I became obsessed with the idea that something had, in a sense, abducted our consciousness for those 3 lost hours. I pored over books on altered states, time anomalies, and even ancient legends of people who claimed to have experienced time slips or moments when reality seemed to pause. Nothing, however, fully explained the vivid clarity of our shared experience. I even considered the possibility that our bodies might have been left behind in our apartment while something else, something beyond our understanding, had whisked our minds away to another realm. The thought was both terrifying and strangely alluring. Late at night, when I lie awake in our quiet apartment, I still catch myself staring at the ceiling, wondering if that same sensation might return. I sometimes feel as if I'm teetering on the edge of 2 worlds, one solid and familiar, the other a shifting, dreamlike realm where time is fluid and the rules of reality bend in ways we can't comprehend. I can almost feel that mysterious force tugging at me, urging me to remember, to look up, to search for answers in the stars outside my window. I've tried talking to friends about it, but whenever I do, their skeptical smiles and casual dismissals only deepen my sense of isolation. They say it's probably just a trick of the mind, a shared hallucination brought on by being overtired or stressed. But I know what I felt, that overwhelming, inexplicable certainty that for those 3 lost hours, we weren't in our apartment at all. I remember the way my heart had pounded during that frozen moment when we were forced to simply exist. And I remember the eerie silence that followed, the silence that seemed to say, "This is not how things are meant to be." One night, a few weeks after the incident, my fiancé and I were sitting together on our small balcony, the city lights flickering below and the night air cool against our skin. We didn't talk much, each of us lost in our thoughts, the memory of that strange night lingering like a shadow. I reached for his hand, and in that brief, silent moment, we both acknowledged that something inexplicable had happened to us, a shared experience that defied conventional. I joked weakly, maybe we got abducted by time, and he laughed, though the sound was tinged with a hint of sadness and uncertainty. Yet, even as we tried to make light of it, neither of us could ignore the gnawing question. What if it wasn't a dream at all? What if, for those 3 mysterious hours, our consciousnesses had been taken somewhere else, somewhere that operates on a different set of rules, a place where the normal flow of time is an illusion? The idea both terrifies and fascinates me. It suggests that the universe might be far more complex, far more alive than we dare to imagine. I've spent countless nights poring over research, combing through obscure theories and accounts of similar experiences. I've read about people who claim to have experienced time slips, instances where entire moments vanish without a trace, leaving only a lingering sense of disorientation. Some say it's a glitch in the matrix of our reality. Others believe it's a brush with a higher plane of existence, a brief, accidental rendezvous with something beyond our world. I'm not sure which, if any, of these explanations is correct. All I know is that every time I close my eyes, I can still see that night vividly. The cold detachment as we lay there, the soft glow of our apartment lights, and that inexplicable sensation of being caught between 2 worlds. Even now, as I navigate the routine rhythms of daily life, the memory of that lost time remains a silent companion. I find myself glancing at clocks with an uneasy curiosity, wondering if, somewhere in the vast tapestry of time, a piece of our existence has been rearranged. I'm always a little more cautious when the night is particularly still, and sometimes, when the world feels too quiet, I almost expect to feel that same pull again. The irresistible lure of the unknown, drawing me into a space where the normal rules no longer apply. I don't have all the answers, and perhaps I never will. But that night, when our lives slipped silently away for 3 long, disorienting hours, left an indelible mark on me. A reminder that reality is far more mysterious than we care to admit. I carry that experience with me, a mix of wonder and quiet dread, always keeping an eye on the dark corners of the night, waiting, just in case the universe decides to reveal another of its secrets. Predator 5. I was raised in a small, rugged mountain town in central Oregon, where poverty was a constant companion and our home was nothing more than a modest double-wide trailer. Back then, I never had a proper bedroom. My younger sisters and I slept together on a worn-out futon in the living room, our dreams intermingling with the creaks of the old house. Every night, before sleep took me, I would quietly slip out of bed and creep down to the living room. I would stand before the large window, the cool glass reflecting the flickering shadows of our sparse light, and say, "How woo?" And, as if in reply, a massive wolf head would materialize in the darkened pane, its eyes glinting softly as it returned, "How woo?" Those encounters were like odd dreams, gentle, almost playful exchanges that never truly frightened me as a child, though they left strange marks behind. I would awaken in the morning with leaves and specks of dirt mysteriously scattered on the floor, remnants of a night when something inexplicable had brushed past me. Things changed the day we moved into the suburbs. The wide open country and the comforting isolation of our former home gave way to a cramped community where every sound and shadow felt magnified. In the city's relentless hum, my nightly visits to the window became a source of dread rather than wonder. I remember one particular evening when, at the age of 9 or 10, I had to visit the doctor because a classmate had fallen ill. It was my first time getting a shot, and as the nurse approached with a cold, glinting needle, panic seized me. I begged her to keep that thing away, and as they held me down, 3 nurses and my pediatrician, Dr. Lee, I saw fleeting images of shadowy figures. In those agonizing moments, flashes of pain and darkness surged through my eyes, a disorienting prelude to something I couldn't quite comprehend. From that day forward, whenever I felt sleep coming on, I was always alert, terrified that those silent visitors might return. I would wake up to find them next to my bed or peering in through the window, their intentions unmasked and knowing. As I grew older, those abduction-like experiences peaked around the age of 13 or 14. They happened with a regularity that was both bizarre and deeply unsettling, about 1 every 2 months. I learned to cope by adjusting my life around them. I'd rush home from school and go straight to bed, only to awaken around midnight and try to stay awake as long as I could, hoping desperately that nothing would happen. But even that strategy offered little solace, as the incidents seeped into every facet of my existence. School became a blur, and family life was marred by the constant, creeping anxiety of the unknown. I remember nights when I'd wake up in a different set of clothes or find myself in a place far from where I'd fallen asleep, mysterious shifts that I could neither control nor explain. It was as if my very consciousness was being unmoored, taken to places where time lost all meaning. The final incident occurred on my 27th birthday, a night that remains etched in my memory with the clarity of a vivid nightmare. I had just finished calling into work, determined not to go in, and stepped outside to my car, eager for a moment of solitude. The night was unusually still, the stars hidden behind a thin veil of clouds. As I looked up, I saw something moving in the sky, a dark, amorphous shape that defied definition. At first, it reminded me of the space shuttle, but then it began to shift, its form rippling and changing until it was nothing like any craft I'd seen before. A cold dread seized me as the object started to move directly toward me. I scrambled into my car and tried to start the engine, but it wouldn't turn over. Then came a sharp, buzzing ringing in my head, a noise so jarring and painful that I could barely think. I glanced upward, and there it was, hovering right over the head of my car, its surface dark and liquid, its edges indiscernible in the dim light. Suddenly, one segment of the craft materialized, a slender rod-like extension that moved toward me. Before I could react, it brushed against my side, and everything went black. I woke up an hour later, disoriented and drenched in sweat, with no memory of what had happened in between. I called off work that day, though I was terrified of what the future might hold if the visits resumed. Since then, those experiences have ceased, but the echoes remain. I live as I always did during that dark period, unable to sleep at night, forced to work during the night and sleep during the day, relationships strained by a constant undercurrent of fear and isolation. Sometimes I wonder if my parents had any inkling of what was happening when I was a child. There were subtle signs, mysterious marks on the floor, unexplained changes in my behavior, and a vague, unspoken worry in their eyes. They never spoke of it openly, and I've come to accept that they too were trying to protect me from a truth too vast and terrifying to fully comprehend. Now, years later, I find myself still haunted by those events. I haven't seen any of those visitors since that final incident, but the impact remains. I sometimes wake up in a place far from where I fell asleep, in different clothes, as if my body had been rearranged in the night. I have questions that have never been answered, and a quiet desperation to understand what was real and what was a product of a terrified, malleable mind. I've tried hypnotherapy and countless hours of research, but the memories slip away like water through my fingers. I don't know if what I experienced was an abduction of consciousness, a pulling of my very essence into realms beyond our understanding, or if it was simply a series of vivid, disturbing dreams. The fact that, as a child, I wasn't frightened but rather intrigued by the nightly how-woo exchanges, only to later be terrified when the encounters grew invasive, leaves me with a bitter, unresolved paradox. It's a secret I carry, a haunting reminder that our reality might be far more fragile than we'd like to believe. Even now, on sleepless nights when the world is quiet and shadows creep along the walls, I can't help but glance at the window, half expecting to see that large, inscrutable wolf head or a shifting, amorphous shape. I live with a lingering sense of being watched, a subtle, persistent echo of those nights when time itself was stolen from me. And though I've managed to build a life that keeps the terror at bay, albeit at a great personal cost, the memories of those inexplicable encounters remain etched into my soul, a constant, unyielding reminder that the universe holds secrets that are both beautiful and terrifying, waiting just beyond the edges of our understanding. Hey everyone, if you found this channel gripping and want more real stories, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you're always in the loop. Redditor 6. I was 15, staying at my grandparents' house with my parents and younger sister. Our modest home was a patchwork of love and hardship, a relic of simpler times in a small Midwestern town. That evening, we were gathered around the dining table, preparing to eat a meal lovingly cooked by my grandmother. She was an immigrant from the Caribbean, and one of her many idiosyncrasies was leaving the bathroom window open, both a matter of frugality and a cherished island custom meant to invite the cool night breeze. Even as a kid, I found the open window in the cramped bathroom unsettling. Every time I had to use it, I'd always feel a prickle of anxiety, my eyes darting toward the gaping aperture as if expecting to see something lurking in the dark. That habit of mine, honed over years of uneasy sleep and restless nights, was about to lead me into an experience I can hardly put into words. It was just before dinner. I had excused myself to use the bathroom, and as usual, I approached the open window with reluctant caution. The sky outside was a deep, endless black, punctuated by a few scattered stars that glinted like distant promises. I pulled down the window shade just enough to get a glimpse outside. The cool night air brushed against my skin as I relieved myself. I remember the steady hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant sound of crickets chirping in the cool air. Then, suddenly, a noise shattered that fragile calm. It wasn't a sound I could describe easily, a high-pitched, grating noise that seemed to resonate not from outside, but from deep within my own head. In that split second, my heart leapt into my throat. The sound was alien and discordant, slicing through the ambient night with a sharpness that left my ears ringing. I froze, the natural urge to move replaced by a paralyzing dread. I struggled to comprehend what I had just heard, but before I could even muster a thought, a blinding light exploded before my eyes. The light was pure and white, overwhelming every detail around me. In what felt like an instant, the world went utterly dark. I cannot recall any moments of struggle or terror during that blackout. It was as if time itself had been snatched away. When I finally awoke, I was no longer in the bathroom. I found myself sitting at the family dining table with my parents and my sister, plates of food in front of each of us. I had somehow eaten, though I had no recollection of the meal. The conversation flowed naturally, my parents casually discussing my soccer team, my sister laughing softly, just as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. It was as if the entire incident had been erased from our shared reality, replaced by the mundane chatter of a family dinner. For a long time afterward, I sat in silent confusion, trying to piece together the fragments of my memory. I couldn't explain how I had woken up in the dining room or how the vivid, terrifying moment had slipped away so completely. I distinctly remembered the sensation of the blinding light, the paralyzing sound that had echoed in my head, and the feeling of being swept away from the only safety I'd known in that moment, the window through which I had watched the night. Later, as we drove home that evening, my parents chatted as if nothing was amiss. Yet, I couldn't shake the sense that something profound had occurred, something that defied the natural order. I went straight to sleep that night, utterly exhausted by the experience, but also haunted by a lingering question: what had really happened when I was in that bathroom? The next morning, I tried to piece together the details. I recalled the feeling of being utterly immobilized, as though my body had been taken over by forces beyond my control. I remembered the flash of the intense light, so overwhelming that my vision had been consumed by it, and the abrupt plunge into darkness that followed. I tried to articulate it to my parents later, but my words came out as nothing more than a jumble of fearful whispers. My parents exchanged concerned glances, and though they didn't press further, I could see in their eyes a trace of worry they hadn't voiced. Over the years, I've thought about that night often, searching for an explanation that could make sense of the inexplicable. Was it merely a vivid, disturbing dream, a product of my anxious mind and the strangeness of the open window? Or had something truly otherworldly happened, a fleeting intrusion into our everyday lives that left no trace except for the memory of a blinding white light and a sound that seemed to come from within me? The thought both terrifies and fascinates me. I've heard stories from others about similar experiences, tales of moments when time seemed to warp, when consciousness was lifted from its usual confines and placed somewhere else, even if only for a heartbeat. Some say it's a kind of abduction of the mind, a brief brush with a realm that exists just outside our perception. I often wonder if that's what happened to me that night. I don't claim to have been abducted in the traditional sense, pulled away into a distant spaceship or taken to a secret laboratory. No, what I experienced was subtler, a profound, almost dreamlike shift in my awareness, as though I had been transported to a place where normal rules no longer applied, and then just as abruptly returned to the mundane world of my family dinner. In the years that followed, the incident faded into a hazy, almost mythic memory. I grew older, and the terrors of childhood gave way to the rationalizations of adulthood. I told myself that it was just a trick of the mind, an overactive imagination sparked by the vulnerability of youth. And yet, every so often, when I pass by a window on a quiet night or feel the chill of an inexplicable breeze, I remember that blinding light and the strange grating sound that echoed in my head. I have learned not to dwell on it too much. After all, it never happened again, and life has a way of moving forward even when mysteries remain unsolved. I'm okay with that, though there's a part of me that still aches for an explanation, a reason behind that surreal moment when time and consciousness seem to slip away. I have come to accept that some experiences, especially those that occur in the quiet hours of the night, are destined to remain enigmas, a part of our inner world that defies easy explanation. Now, whenever I find myself in a quiet room with an open window, I feel a subtle unease, a lingering question of whether the universe might, just for a moment, reach through the veil of ordinary life and remind me of that long-ago night. And even though I've grown older and learned to live with the mystery, the memory remains, a silent testament to the fragile, often inexplicable nature of our reality. Redditor 7. In the 90s, my family lived in a small coastal city in Saudi Arabia. Our flat was in the midst of being renovated, and for a week or so, my older brother and I were forced to share a king-size bed. I was about 10 at the time, and my brother, a few years older at 13, always seemed a world apart from me, both in age and in the way he viewed the strange mysteries of our world. That night, as I lay under a thin, threadbare duvet in our cramped living area, I remember feeling oddly alert despite the comforting darkness. Our flat was modest but filled with the soft hum of nighttime activity outside, a distant roar of the sea mingled with the occasional call of a street vendor. The large window in our living room, a relic of our old sun-baked home, was always left open by our grandmother, following an old Caribbean custom she cherished. It allowed a cool breeze to sweep through, but that night it also became a portal to something unimaginable. I had been drifting in a restless sleep when I felt my brother shaking my shoulder, his small hand jabbing at me repeatedly as he whispered, I am Eek. Do you see this too?" His voice was a mix of excitement and terror, pulling me from the haze of sleep. I blinked, half expecting him to be dreaming, and then my eyes opened fully to the darkness. What I saw made my blood run cold. Standing by the side of the bed, on my brother's side, was a figure unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was tall and lanky, its body made entirely of a dim, shifting light that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. There were no discernible features on its face, no eyes, no mouth, just an unbroken expanse of luminous haze. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace, as if it were part of a strange, silent ritual. Before I could even gather my scattered thoughts, the figure extended what I can only describe as a neck, a fluid, elongated extension of light that reached out toward the center of our bed. In that horrifying instant, everything around me seemed to slow down. I was paralyzed, unable to cry out or move a muscle. The soft, warm fabric of my duvet pressed against my skin, but my mind was focused entirely on that surreal, alien gesture. The figure's elongated limb glided forward and, without warning, disintegrated into countless tiny motes of light. There was a massive static sound, a deep, crackling white noise that filled the room, as if the very fabric of the universe had been torn apart. The sound was so intense, so overwhelming that it drowned out every other sensation, leaving only that chaotic burst of static and the sight of scattered, fading lights drifting across the floor. My brother and I screamed, our cries a desperate, uncoordinated duet in the silent terror that followed. In the overwhelming chaos of the moment, we instinctively scrambled under our duvets, clinging to each other for comfort, our hearts pounding in a rhythm that felt like it would never cease. I remember the cold terror that gripped me, the way the static sound still echoed in my ears long after it had faded, like the dying embers of a long-forgotten fire. The next morning, I awoke with a jolt, my eyes snapping open to the soft, uncertain light of dawn, I found myself still in that same king-size bed, the covers slightly ruffled as if we had fought against an unseen force during the night. My brother was there too, his eyes wide with an unspoken understanding of what had occurred, though no words were exchanged. Without a word, we both bolted from the room and ran out into the cool morning air, our feet pounding on the cracked floor of our renovated flat. We never spoke of it in detail after that, though the memory never left us. It became a silent pact between us, a secret shared in the quiet moments when the world was still. Over the years, I have tried to rationalize what happened that night. I was young, and the boundary between waking and dreaming can be as fragile as the morning mist over the coast. Some said it was merely a product of sleep paralysis, a vivid, terrifying hallucination conjured by a frightened mind. Others whispered about something far more extraordinary, an abduction of consciousness that left no physical trace except for scattered motes of light and an unexplainable static sound that echoed in our memories. I remember how, even as I grew older and the nightmares of that night faded into the background of my everyday life, there were still moments when I'd catch a glimpse of a light at the corner of my eye or feel a shiver that reminded me of that indescribable presence. The strange encounter left subtle clues behind. On some mornings, I would notice tiny specks of what looked like dried dirt or minuscule leaves scattered on the floor. Traces I later suspected were remnants of that unworldly visitation. My parents never mentioned anything unusual, and my grandmother, despite her many superstitions, remained completely oblivious. My brother, however, would sometimes exchange a long, haunted look with me, as if silently acknowledging that what we experienced was not a mere dream, but a brush with something beyond our understanding. As the years passed, the incidents grew less frequent, perhaps once a year or even less, but the memory of that night has persisted like an echo. Now, well over 35 years old, I still live with the weight of that experience. I lead a life marked by a constant underlying tension, a hyper-awareness of the night, the shadows, and the spaces between what we can see and what might be lurking just beyond. I've learned to navigate my days with caution, and while I no longer lie awake in terror, I still sometimes find myself checking the corners of dark rooms, half expecting that familiar, featureless glow to return. I've often wondered what the figure truly was. Was it an alien visitor, a projection of a collective subconscious, or perhaps a remnant of some forgotten dimension slipping through the cracks of our reality? The truth, if it ever exists, remains locked away in a mystery that my young mind could never fully grasp. All I know is that in that moment, something extraordinary happened, a moment when the ordinary world was torn asunder by the inexplicable, leaving me with a memory that both terrifies and fascinates me to this day. I don't claim to have all the answers, and sometimes I wish I could forget that night completely, but the experience has become a part of who I am, a reminder that our world is far more fragile, far more mysterious than we dare to imagine. And so, even now, when I lay my head down at night in a quiet room, I feel a subtle, almost imperceptible pull toward the window, a lingering hope, or perhaps a quiet dread, that one day I might once again glimpse that shadow of light, if only to remind me that the universe still holds secrets waiting in the darkness, just beyond our reach. Redditor 8. It was one of those late, bitterly cold evenings when the playground, usually bustling with the echoes of laughter and swinging chains, lay deserted under a heavy blanket of silence and frost. My friend and I had wandered there after a long day, seeking refuge from the monotony of our daily routine and the numb chill that had seeped into our bones. We sat on the swings, huddled close for warmth, our breaths visible in the crisp air as we talked softly about everything and nothing. The sky overhead was a tapestry of glittering stars, the kind that make you feel both insignificant and connected to something immense. I remember leaning back, letting the cold metal of the swing creak under me and gazing upward, lost in the endless expanse. It was then that something caught my eye, a flash of movement so sudden and unexpected that my heart lurched in my chest. At first I thought it was a shooting star, a brief glimmer that would fade into darkness. But as I watched, I realized that it was far more than that. There, slicing silently through the night, was a giant blue fireball, an object that seemed to be falling from the heavens. It was enormous, much larger than any shooting star I'd ever seen, and, if I recalled correctly, even bigger than the way the moon loomed in the sky on clear nights. The object glowed with an intense, otherworldly blue, its light pulsing as if it had a heartbeat of its own. And yet, despite its size and brilliance, it made no sound at all. Not even a whisper of noise could be heard, as if it were falling from an unimaginable distance. My mind raced as I sat frozen on the swing. What if was all I could muster, the words barely a murmur swallowed by the night. I frantically scanned the sky, trying to follow its trajectory as it descended in a slow, almost deliberate arc. The silence of the scene was unsettling, a void of sound that made every heartbeat thunder in my ears. I glanced sideways at my friend, expecting to see a look of shared wonder or terror, but she was staring blankly at me, her eyes wide and searching. It was then I realized with a pang that she hadn't seen it at all. I tried to explain, my voice trembling as I gestured wildly toward the sky. There! It was huge, like a ball of blue fire. It just it was falling out of the sky, right in front of us. I repeated it several times, as if my words alone could conjure that impossible sight into her eyes. But she only shook her head slowly, her expression a mix of disbelief and the skepticism that comes from years of dismissing what one cannot explain. Despite her lack of confirmation, I knew what I'd seen. The image was seared into my mind. The brilliant blue glow against the dark velvet of the night, the slow, silent descent, the inexplicable sense that the universe had just opened up in a way that defied logic. After what felt like an eternity of standing there in the playground, I could no longer bear the intensity of it. I urged my friend to leave, though she hesitated, still processing what I had described. We eventually walked away, the cold crunch of our footsteps on the frosted ground echoing in the quiet night. Back at home, my mind was a whirl of questions. I tried searching online later that night, scrolling through reports of meteor showers and strange aerial phenomena, desperate to find some reference to the enormous blue fireball I had witnessed, but no one else seemed to have seen it. No documented event, no news report, nothing that could confirm or explain what I had experienced. Over the following days, I replayed that night over and over in my head. I thought about how the object's silent descent felt almost deliberate, as if it were part of some cosmic design rather than a random meteor blazing across the sky. I wondered if it was merely a trick of the light, a rare natural phenomenon amplified by the clear winter air, or if it was something else entirely, a glimpse into a reality far beyond our own. I even considered the possibility that it was a sign, a subtle message delivered by a universe that rarely speaks in such overt terms. Yet, no matter how much I tried to rationalize the event, the memory remained vivid. The blue fireball's glow was imprinted on my mind, a symbol of that surreal moment when the ordinary world gave way to the extraordinary. It wasn't like any experience I'd had before. There was a precision to it, a weightlessness in its movement that made it seem almost alive. I remember the way my pulse quickened, the rush of adrenaline that made my senses hyper-aware, and the inexplicable feeling that for a brief moment, time itself had slowed to allow me to witness something impossible. I shared the story with a few friends later, but their reactions were mixed. Some laughed it off as an overactive imagination or a case of too much cold air affecting my mind. Others simply nodded, their eyes reflecting a hint of curiosity but no real understanding. The fact that my friend hadn't seen it only deepened the mystery for me. It was as if the fireball had been meant for my eyes alone, a personal message from the cosmos that I was destined to keep secret. Now, years later, I still catch myself glancing upward on clear nights, half expecting to see that same brilliant blue light tear across the sky. I can't explain why that one moment has held such power over me, why it still stirs a mix of wonder and dread deep within my bones. Perhaps it was simply a once-in-a-lifetime phenomenon, a rare quirk of nature that defied explanation. Or maybe it was something more, an encounter that, for a fleeting moment, bridged the gap between our mundane lives and a vast, mysterious universe. I may never know the truth, but every time I look up, I'm reminded that there are secrets in the darkness, waiting silently to reveal themselves. Hey everyone, if you found this channel gripping and want more real stories, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you're always in the loop. Reddit Dire 9. My brother's friend, a quiet, unassuming guy who never liked to talk about the paranormal, once shared with my brother a memory from his teenage years that I can't seem to shake. He described a night when, as a young boy, he saw an intense, almost blinding light streaming through his bedroom window. He spoke of how the light came in a barrage of colors, blue, red, green, mixed with a strange, resonant humming that seemed to vibrate from within his very head. He said that night, while he was trying to sleep, the sound had started softly and built up to a piercing, grating noise that he couldn't ignore. At first, he thought it was just his imagination playing tricks, a trick of a restless mind. But then, he remembered waking up the next morning, feeling as if he had run a marathon. His entire body ached with exhaustion, and he was left with a sense of disorientation that clung to him for days afterward. His own mother later confirmed that she had seen odd shifting lights that night, lights that appeared again on other occasions over the years. Even now, in his late 30s, he rarely speaks of it. He just shrugs and says, "I can't explain it," as if the experience is both too personal and too overwhelming to discuss openly. What fascinates me about these accounts isn't the notion of being whisked away by beings from another world, though that possibility sends a shiver down my spine. It's the profound consistency across so many stories from all over the globe. Working-class people like my brother's friend and his mother, who typically hold conservative views and dismiss supernatural explanations, have experienced events so vivid they defy rational explanation. They don't call it an abduction, partly because the term itself seems too grand, too cinematic for what they experienced. Instead, it's an encounter, a fleeting moment when reality cracks open and something raw and unexplainable pours through. I've heard many accounts like this. Some say it's an abduction of consciousness, not of the body, an experience where you're taken somewhere even if your physical form remains in place. Others suggest it might be a kind of widespread hallucination, where the human brain, under the right conditions, creates experiences that feel as tangible as life itself. I find both theories equally compelling. Even if what my brother's friend experienced was just a product of an overactive mind, the vivid details, the cacophony of colors, the eerie humming sound, the overwhelming fatigue afterward, are too consistent to be entirely dismissed. I remember him describing the scene with such precision that it seemed like he had been both observer and unwilling participant in a cosmic play. He said that the light wasn't like anything from our normal world. It was almost surgical in its clarity, as if it were designed to strip away all the mundane details and reveal a hidden layer of truth. The humming was not a simple buzz, but a complex, layered sound that resonated deep within him, as if it were a language, speaking directly to his subconscious. When he woke up, the feeling of exhaustion was so intense that every movement felt as if he had been dragged through fire. His body was drained, and his mind was foggy, a lingering echo of that night's encounter. What makes it even more intriguing is that his mother, a practical, no-nonsense woman, recalls similar experiences, glimpses of strange, unworldly lights that flickered in her peripheral vision. She would never admit to believing in aliens or the paranormal, yet she knew something was different that night. It's as if the universe had sent a quiet, uninvited message, one that those who witnessed it are left with for the rest of their lives. They don't label it, they simply live with a silent, unexplainable truth, a secret that binds them together in a way that words can't capture. I've spent many sleepless nights pondering these experiences, scouring obscure forums and reading old, dusty books that claim to document similar encounters. There's a strange comfort in knowing that I'm not alone in witnessing such phenomena, that there are countless stories from every corner of the world that share the same eerie consistency. Whether it's the story of a young boy haunted by a burst of intense, multicolored light and a dissonant hum, or the chilling accounts of adults who wake up feeling utterly exhausted and disoriented, one thing is clear. These events are real to the people who experience them, regardless of what science or skepticism might say. I sometimes wonder if these encounters are simply the brain's way of grappling with the unknown, a desperate attempt to give shape to the ineffable. Perhaps the human mind, faced with the vast, uncharted mysteries of existence, creates these experiences to bridge the gap between what we understand and what lies just beyond our reach. Or maybe, just maybe, there are forces out there, forces that we aren't meant to understand fully, that occasionally brush against our lives with the subtlety of a whisper and the shock of a thunderclap. The thought that it might all be an elaborate hallucination, one that the brain constructs with physical, measurable elements, doesn't make it any less fascinating. In fact, it might be even more remarkable if our own minds are capable of conjuring such intricate, deeply emotional experiences without any external stimulus. But as I listen to my brother's friend recount his memory, I can't help but feel that there's something truly profound at work, a reminder that our understanding of reality is still so limited. I've noticed that whenever I discuss these accounts with others, there's a tendency for people to brush them off, laughing nervously or shaking their heads as if to say, "It's just your imagination." Yet for those of us who have heard these stories from trusted friends and family, people who are as grounded in everyday life as you can get, the experiences are anything but imaginary. They are visceral, haunting, and undeniably real to those who have lived through them. Sometimes at family gatherings, when the conversation drifts to memories of the past, I dare to mention that my brother's friend once saw a blazing light and heard a symphony of hues and sounds that defied explanation. He always shrugs, saying, "I can't explain it," and his mother nods in quiet agreement, her eyes distant and knowing. It's a fleeting moment, a brief acknowledgement of a secret that we all share but never fully articulate. And perhaps that's how it's meant to be. An unspoken truth that lingers in the corners of our minds, a constant reminder that the universe holds mysteries far beyond the limits of our understanding. Even if these experiences turn out to be nothing more than the product of a unique, shared hallucination, a quirk of the human brain triggered by the pressures of daily life, I still find them endlessly intriguing. They are a testament to the fact that there is so much about our existence that we have yet to unravel. So many layers of reality that remain hidden from our ordinary perception, whether they are visits from beings from another world or simply the mind's way of coping with the enormity of existence. These moments continue to inspire both wonder and a quiet, persistent fear of the unknown. I don't know what the truth is, and maybe I never will. All I know is that for those who have experienced these inexplicable encounters, those intense flashes of light, the haunting sounds, the overwhelming exhaustion, the memory is as real as the air we breathe. And in that truth lies a kind of beauty, a reminder that our lives, no matter how ordinary they may seem, are interwoven with threads of mystery that stretch out into the infinite. Even if we never fully understand them, these experiences are a part of who we are, a shared secret that connects us all in our quiet, unspoken wonder at the vast, unknowable universe. Redditor 10. It was a late Saturday night, around 1 a.m., when my husband and I returned to our apartment complex in the heart of the city. We live in a sleek, modern building surrounded by tech company headquarters and crisscrossed by major highways, a place where life is fast, efficient, and relentlessly urban. That night, as we walked from the parking garage toward our building, the world felt unusually still, as if holding its breath in anticipation of something unimaginable. I remember glancing up almost on a whim, the cool night air, the neon glow of distant streetlights, and a vast, starlit sky overhead. Out of the corner of my eye, a colossal triangle-like object slowly glided above us. Its form was unmistakable. A massive geometric craft, silent and unyielding, with 2 rows of lights running down each side like an otherworldly barcode. For a moment, time seemed to freeze as I stared in disbelief. My husband noticed my frozen gaze and turned his head in my direction. Our eyes met, and we both knew without saying a word, something wasn't right. We began arguing in low, hushed tones, trying to wrap our heads around what we had just seen. "What the actual duck is that?" I murmured, my voice shaking with a mix of awe and terror. We instinctively moved to the side of the building, seeking a better vantage point to examine the inexplicable sight. Every step felt heavy as we navigated the dark corridors of our urban maze, our breath visible in the cool night air as we craned our necks upward. About 10 minutes later, as if the universe had decided to repeat its cosmic joke, the craft reappeared. This time it was closer and far clearer, its metallic surface catching the stray beams of city light. I could make out minor details, a subtle texture on its body, the precise arrangement of its twin rows of lights that glowed with a soft, unwavering luminescence. The sight was so surreal that we nearly burst into screams, our voices lost amid the silence of the night. It was as if this immense, triangular enigma was performing just for us, a silent ballet in the sky. We watched, breathless, as the craft moved with deliberate slowness. It didn't roar or buzz like any machine we'd ever seen. It was completely mute, a phantom drifting through the urban darkness. Then, as we held our collective breath, the object pulled straight up into the air, its motion graceful and unhurried. I could see it slowly becoming more and more transparent, like a ghost fading into morning mist, until, miraculously, it disappeared right before our eyes. I remember feeling a profound mixture of relief and terror as we stood there beneath an empty sky. We waited for what felt like an eternity, though in reality it was probably just an hour, as our eyes roamed the heavens for any sign of that strange visitor. My phone camera, pointed from the roof of the tallest apartment building across the street, had captured only a few blurry images that failed to do justice to the spectacle we'd witnessed. Once we finally conceded that the craft was gone, my husband and I trudged back inside, our minds racing with questions. How could something so enormous and detailed appear over a city that never sleeps? How could it be so silent, as if it belonged to a different universe where sound simply didn't exist? We spent the rest of the night scouring online forums and news sites, comparing our encounter to the descriptions of stealth bomber planes and clandestine military experiments. Yet, nothing fit the bill. This wasn't military hardware, and it certainly wasn't a product of our modern technology. It was something else entirely, an anomaly that refused to be classified. Even though the rational part of my mind tried to dismiss it as an overactive imagination or a trick of perspective, the memory remains etched in my soul. The fact that we live in a bustling urban area where most UFO sightings are dismissed as nothing more than distant lights on the horizon only makes the encounter more jarring. In a city where the sky is usually obscured by smog and the glare of neon, this sight was a stark reminder that the unknown can still intrude upon our most mundane lives. I still find myself checking the skies on clear nights, scanning the dark expanse for any hint of that triangular shape or a row of lights flickering in the distance. Sometimes, when the wind is just right and the city falls into a brief lull, I can almost feel the lingering presence of that craft, as if it were waiting for the perfect moment to reappear. My husband, though he tries to laugh it off with me, often falls silent when I mention it, his eyes reflecting a mixture of skepticism and quiet wonder. In the weeks that followed, we tried to piece together every detail, reconstructing the event as best we could. We talked about how the craft's appearance was so out of place, a silent, glowing triangle in a city filled with constant noise and movement. The moment it disappeared, pulling upward into the void, left us with an unsettling emptiness, as if a window into another reality had been suddenly closed. I even recall feeling an odd chill that night, a shiver that seemed to come not from the cold, but from the deep, unspoken realization that our world is far larger, far stranger than we care to admit. We never did find a definitive explanation. Some nights I wonder if we were simply caught in a moment of collective hallucination, a shared dream spurred by fatigue and the overwhelming nature of city life. But then I remember the precision of the craft's movement, the unerring way it became transparent and vanished, and I know that no ordinary explanation could account for that. It was as if the universe had for one brief moment whispered a secret that only we were meant to hear. Now, years later, I continue to live with that memory, a constant quiet echo in the background of my daily life. It has left me with a deep sense of curiosity and a persistent need to understand what lies beyond the veil of the ordinary. I may never find all the answers, and perhaps that uncertainty is the true horror of it all. Every time I look up at the sky, I'm reminded that there is a vast, mysterious universe out there, waiting silently to reveal its secrets. In a world where most people dismiss such encounters as mere fantasy, my husband and I share this experience as a sacred, unspoken truth. A reminder that even in the heart of a bustling urban landscape, the extraordinary can still break through, transforming the night into something both beautiful and terrifying. And though the memory sometimes fills me with a quiet dread, it also fills me with wonder. A testament to the fact that our reality is far more complex, far more magical than we could ever imagine.